Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. Trevor Rose-Hamblin, the co-founder and head brewer of Old Irving Brewing Company in Chicago, is here to talk about barrels, food, and most importantly, the importance of mental health. And we'll get into it all in a moment. But first, please visit allaboutbeer.com for original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Beer Travelers, Brewer to Brewer, and the All About Beer podcast simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. This show and all of the work we do is supported by you. You can visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to help keep the content fresh. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising on this show, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. A quick word before we dive into this episode. We're going to be talking about mental health and getting into some pretty serious subjects. If you're having thoughts of self-harm or suicide, text or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988 from your phone. There are also resources available at speakingofsuicide.com where you can access important resources. It's okay not to be okay. Last month in New Hampshire, Trevor Rose-Hamblin, the co-founder and head brewer at Old Irving Brewing Company in Chicago, stood before a packed ballroom in Manchester, New Hampshire. He was there to deliver the keynote at the state's annual Craft Brewers Conference, and he was there to talk about his own life experiences and to urge everyone in the room to think about mental health and ways to help people from causing self-harm. It was an impactful speech, and one that he references in this conversation several times as he talks about how Old Irving came to be, life in kitchens, and how critically important it is to be listening, watching, and always working to help keep people safe and working towards a better headspace. This was recorded the day before his talk, and we'll get into that part of the conversation after a brief warm-up. But I first started off by asking him about the brewing scene in Chicago. Here's our conversation.
I'm not asking you to speak for all of Chicago when I ask this question.
Oh my God, please don't make me.
There is a seemingly love affair that comes with barrels and stouts.
Yeah.
In your town, in
Yeah.
your city.
Well,
and you make them.
I make them.
Yeah. And you seem to enjoy making them, and having tasted them, you excel at making them.
I appreciate that.
There's also no shortage of other breweries that excel at making them. Is this just like a goose flaps its wings and a hurricane forms over Lake Michigan? Like,
Yeah.
Why?
Right?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, it's funny you should say goose. I think that,
Weird,
right?
Yeah, it's,
well, when a goose flaps its wings, I think, obviously seeing the success of Goose Island's barrel program, and I think all of us kind of being obsessed with those beers is something that leads a lot of us to that. And also, it's hard, it's easy to see when someone releases one of these beers and you see people lining up for it. Everyone gets, the little stars in their eyes and they get really excited. They want to, kind of drive that home. For me, like the thing that attracted me to beer in the first place was kind of the wait. I really enjoyed the wait. Like, just like baking bread or anything else like that, it's a meticulous process. You have to wait for it to be done, and you kind of
WAIT, not WAIGHT.
Exactly, not the weight of my profession.
Okay,
bearing down on my soul.
Because there's some of those stouts that are pretty heavy, so yeah. I wasn't quite sure where you were going with.
But it's the waiting time for these beers to come out. Weeks upon weeks. With our lagers, we're talking about months, and then finally with our stouts, we're talking about a year or more, right? And I think that kind of wait and then that anticipation, and then when it does finally come out, it is very exciting. Also, we're very close to Bourbon County. I mean, we're only 7-hour drive away from Louisville. I think there's a big love for bourbon inside of Chicago and on the outskirts as well. At any kind of beer share that you go to, you're going to find just as many bottles of really hype bourbon and really great bourbon kind of floating about as well. So I think there's a lot of reasons, but now I think we're all just kind of one-upping each other. It feels like a little bit.
Can you talk about that though? Because you mentioned hype bourbon, right? And I follow some of the blogs or some of the Instagrams and then certainly some of the beer places that talk about it as well, kind of thing. But you're talking about a year in barrels. You're talking about a year for your stouts. So like,
yeah, that's for me. Yeah.
Okay, but like, let's start there.
Sure.
Why a year?
So I think the best way I've heard it stated from someone in our industry who I'm very near and dear with is, for every Plato of residual sugar or in your final gravity, for every Plato that you have, that should be a month. So
Okay.
if you're finishing out at 15 Plato, it should be 15 months.
Okay.
And so on and so forth. We had to get a little creative because obviously with Krampus cookies and the amount of space that we have, we only have, let's say, 11 months really to age that beer. So we've had to get kind of weird with it because our finishing gravity is probably right around 14, 15.
Yeah.
And so when we pull that beer, we've noticed that we're missing a lot of wood characteristics. So we've kind of employed some newer things where we'll take a lower finishing gravity Krampus, age it in barrels, and then blend it into the whole to get more of that wood. And it's actually really helped. This year's, you'll really be able to tell in the presence of oak and in spirit, just how big of a difference that made, especially in these like really heavy, sweet kind of what they call pastry stouts, right?
So you feel like the month per Plato is actually a good metric then?
I think it is, yeah. And this comes from people who have been doing this for a long time. Luckily, in the Chicago brewing industry is just so amazing and open, and we talk to each other and we share secrets, and so it's not like the people who are putting out some of the best bourbon barrel stouts, bourbon barrel aged stouts, I think on the planet,
Yeah.
are just having beers and talking about it openly and freely, and I think that also opens the door for a lot of brewers to be able to do that.
Where does the hype fit into that though?
I think that people are just excited by bourbon barrel aged beers. They're high octane. I mean, we really, take care of those beers. I mean, from the moment it goes into the barrel, the kind of barrels that we source are always very important to us. And then once it comes out of the barrel, if you're going to be doing any kind of adjuncting or adding any other kind of specialty ingredients, I mean, that's my heaviest days in the brewery because I'm sitting there tasting and tasting and tasting until it's just absolutely right. And then you go through to the packaging, making sure that it's not, too carbonated because you don't want all that carbonic acid cutting through a lot of that richness and sweetness. You don't want it undercarbonated because then like true beer nerds will be pissed off. And you just like really want to, because if you're going to charge $28 a 2-pack like we do, it's got to freaking sing. And by the way, we're one of the cheaper ones in Chicago at that price. Per ounce.
Per ounce.
Per ounce, yeah.
But does the hype start with? I mean, obviously there is a snake eating its tail at some point where the fans are going to show up online and they're going to be like, oh my god, and the secondary market is going to go nuts, kind of thing.
Sure.
But some of the hype starts with the breweries themselves, where
course,
you
yeah.
feel like, okay, this is. It's probably one of two things, and I'm not accusing you of either, but like it's one of two things where it's a brewery that says like, this is damn good, and
Sure.
like we're proud of this, and
Yeah.
we're justifying the cost per ounce, and you should drink this and all that. And then there's other folks who are just going to be like, hey, it's bourbon barrel aged, and we're going to drop a name of a bourbon that you've probably heard of that
Sure.
shows up on a menu for an expensive amount of
Yeah.
of cash, and therefore, ergo, it must be good, kind of thing.
Yeah, sadly, it doesn't work that way, though.
It does. It doesn't.
It doesn't. Yeah.
Somebody once, I forget what the exact phrase in this moment as we were drinking beers in front of us, but like somebody once said, the name of the bourbon doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct.
Like those are like nice widgets to have.
Totally. And I think more importantly, I think it's like pairing the bourbon for your beer. I mean, pairing the barrel for your beer. I mean,
Sure.
that's always kind of the thing, right? And so, at OIB, we have a full bar of people that are very passionate about spirits. And so, and we also have a lot of great bourbon. So when I'm sitting there and let's say I'm on Midwest Barrel Co., clicking around, seeing what they got available, I'm going to be able to order something from that distillery, at least close to what it is, that we're going to be putting Krampus into. We know what Krampus is, right? It's decadent, it's chocolatey, it's round, it's smooth, there's some coffee notes, but it's not bitter, all these things. So what do we want from that barrel? What kind of bourbon characteristics do we want from from that barrel, so it is really also pairing the beer to that specific bourbon as well, or whiskey.
The base beer has to stand on its own before you even introduce a barrel, though, right?
It depends on what school of thought you're into on that. I've heard tell of very large brands of bourbon barrel-aged beer that is pretty much undrinkable before it goes into barrels. And the barrels do the magic. So, I haven't had that experience. I think the beer that we put into barrels tastes pretty darn good. And then it comes out tasting way better. It's one of those. I think a lot of people do it differently. We do ours like Krampus was a beer that was not barrel aged first, so it had already had kind of its moment, and then we just kind of evolved off of that. So we wanted to make sure it was drinkable otherwise.
How do you manage the hype of those beers? Because you could, I imagine it's got to be a fine line where. If you say like, "Well, this is going to be a life-changing beer. This is going to be a beer that changes your life," or you just kind of put it out there and people get excited because they know who Old Irving is, they know what you guys are doing, kind of thing, and then the customer hype becomes, the hype machine. But then, if the beer itself, and again, I'm not saying this about you all, but like if the beer itself fails to deliver on the promise before anybody's cracked a can,
sure,
you're gonna be the ones who, get that full experience a suck down the line kind of thing. So how do you, have you had those conversations of how you temper reality versus, I don't know, second start of the right? Like,
I think that's a darn good question. For us, I think at OIB, I think we're kind of, it's funny because people know about us. I think people respect us, but I think we still tend to fly maybe a little under the radar. So we're not Krampus sells really well when we put it out, and I would say that's our biggest, we have our hype moment every year, and I think Krampus is sort of our hype moment.
Yeah.
But like, managing hype, I wouldn't say we really need to manage it. What we need to manage this year, and what I think a lot of brewers probably experienced this year, is that everyone put theirs out at the same time, and everyone's brewing more and more every year.
Yeah.
So I think we saw kind of across the board, and I've talked to a lot of my friends that, even the hypiest of the hypes, I think had kind of struggled this year because we all release it right around Thanksgiving. Everyone has a finite amount of money, and they're going to start picking and choosing, or they're going to buy less of each of our stuff so they can kind of spread the love a little bit, which is great, but it's less managing hype and managing amount of liquid, when to release it, and really like, and then like how do you release it between, and I've seen this happen tons, between your off-prem market and from your brew pub or tap room. How do you manage that balance?
Yeah.
And what do you give to your off-prem accounts, your on-prem accounts, and what do you keep in-house? And then what is that volume of liquid in order to keep that hype going, and to keep the excitement going for everyone, and make sure your guests don't feel ripped off. I don't want you as a beer drinker to like come into my place and think that you're not going to get it if you don't get it now, and then see it all over every grocery store all of a sudden, and then it's like cheaper than when you went to go buy it. Like, you got to balance that too. So it's a lot of balance.
The whole Thanksgiving thing, right, with Black Friday and Goose with their Bourbon County Stout, like Black Friday became this thing, and you've seen Lakefront do it, and countless other places. Could you release? I mean, Krampus is obviously going to be a little bit different given the name of it.
Yeah,
tied to early December, mid-December kind of thing.
Absolutely,
but. Could you release a similar beer done in a similar way at a different time of year and get similar results, do you think?
Well, that's what we're doing this year, is kind of experimenting with that. So this last year, what I did was I picked all of like my favorite bourbon barrel aged breweries in the city, and I brewed a larger batch of beer wherein I split the total batch. The first portion we would release just as, regular base, with the promises of a bourbon barrel aged version of that later on.
Yeah.
So I've done everything from, sweet stouts to barley wines to all kinds of things with a bunch of different breweries. And then we're going to release them throughout the year and see how they do in different times of year. See if we can do that, because I would like to do more barrel aging of some kind, especially getting out of the stout role and getting more into barley wines, rye wines, wheat wines, things like that. So we're definitely gonna experiment with that, and see when it does. Because you look at someone like Mike Palin over at Microphone. That dude is releasing just bangers all the time. Almost constantly. He's always got some barrel aged thing that's coming down the line, and that's because during the pandemic he filled a ton of barrels, and he's just been able to and he's just been keeping that momentum going. And they've all been fantastic from what I've had.
No, I like his beers quite a bit. Where do you find inspiration these days?
That's a good question. It comes from a lot of different places. I think a lot of times it's from my team, what's going on in the brewery. Obviously, having a restaurant attached to it, having a lot of new ideas. Our cocktail team is very involved and has a lot of really unique ideas that maybe I wouldn't have thought of before. My general manager, Joshua, he's this crazy creative who puts together flavors I would never even imagine, and then he puts it in front of me. I'm like, that works, and I don't understand why.
It just does.
But it just does. And then, there's also, of course, all of my brewers. It's a very much democracy, within our ranks. We talk, we formulate ideas, we see what sticks, what doesn't, and we move forward. But I usually, classically, because of my history with culinary arts and in restaurants, a lot of my stuff comes from food. Krampus cookies. It's milk and cookies in a can. And then we did, offshoots of that. I've worked in restaurants my whole life. I've had champurrado, because I've been humping lines since I was a kid. I worked with a lot of Mexican people, dude. And so I know what champurrado tastes like. I used to make a 8-hour mole at Moto restaurant back in the day. That it was inspired by that and the Mexican hot chocolate. And then I've got friends in the city who own coffee shops, who are roasting their own beans, who are doing really amazing things, and come over and do cuppings with me. So then I can include their coffee. And so it kind of comes from the beating heart of what Chicago is. It's an area of creators, and I just get to riff off of a lot of people.
The last time that I was in Chicago, I think I did visit the brewery, and I was blown away by the food. The beer was really good. And I enjoyed it. That. But I go to a lot of brew pubs or a lot of places that also have a food component. It's okay, yeah, this is their chicken sandwich, and their fries are okay, that kind of thing. But I walked away. I was with my cousins, and I walked away being holy shit, and I didn't say hi to anybody when I was there that night or anything like that. But I feel like we're about to get to another point in the beer experience where food enters the conversation again. Yeah. For maybe the last 5, 6, 7 years, it hasn't been part of it, because it's we've made our beer taste like food kind of thing. But now what's on the plate and what's in the glass can go well together, and you're sort of nodding along that you might maybe feel the same way.
Big time. I think about when I was at Moto Restaurant, and for any of your listeners who don't know what that is, just to give a little background,
I don't know if I know what that is.
Okay, that's fine. You're going to learn a lot about it tomorrow in my speech.
Yay!
And
we'll talk about that in a minute. But
of course, it's a 1-star Michelin restaurant that I worked for while I was still in culinary school. I did my apprenticeship there. And the whole idea was it was a tasting menu. So you can imagine expensive as hell. Servers wore suits. They had earpieces. The kitchen was silent. It was, intense. But we made beautiful plates. We were kind of like the bad boys of fine dining a little bit. We were a little bit goofy. We had fun. You go down in that basement. You might hear techno bumping but while we're prepping, and, silly videos, because we're kind of science meets food, but real mad scientists, who spend too much time in the basement, have pale complexion, and are becoming part lizard. We were just real weird guys. And back then, there was no no in that kitchen, and that was a big part of the creative process, and everyone had to participate. It was an obligation. if you didn't bring an idea to the table, it wasn't a good day for you.
Okay.
So you had to have new ideas, even if it sucked. Like, bring something to the table, and let's try and make that a reality. And eventually, I got to work up to the point where I was able to, because of the sommelier there, he said, why don't you do, I know you love beer, why don't you do a beer pairing menu? Why don't you throw together a beer option for folks? And I was like, really? So I got to go through this whole portfolio. I mean, you can imagine what we would charge for a beer tasting.
Sure.
I mean, the world was my oyster. I could pick anything I wanted. I was pairing sours. Beautiful, beautiful barrel-aged sours from Belgium with dessert. And people were like, what the fuck are you doing? How the hell are you going to pair us out? I'm like, it's an inspiration on banana split. You have chocolate, you have cherry, you have bananas, and I'm gonna throw you, this creek, and the malt is gonna go with the chocolate.
Yeah.
Of course, the cherries are gonna go with the cherries. The sour is gonna accentuate everything, and then the fizz is gonna come along and cleanse your palate and get you ready for that next bite. I would argue that one of my favorite things to pair in the wine world when I was there, and I learned a ton about wine while I was there, was champagne.
Yeah.
Champagne, it was a joke for us. It was like we didn't know what to pair with something because we made some weird shit, man. Like, I'm talking edible cigars in an ashtray with edible ash that smokes at your table. You'd get your menu, you would eat it. I mean, if you Google Moto sometimes and look it up, we did weird shit. But when we didn't know. Oh, by the way, I want to go back real quick on the cigar course. Yeah. It was Schunkerlo Rauch beer.
As you do.
As you do.
Smoke with smoke. You're never going wrong.
That's right. And so we do champagne a lot because when you're in that moment, you need to be able to cleanse that palate, get people ready for the next sip, and champagne is dynamic enough to be able to do that. And that's when I really realized the power of beer. So we opened Imagining New Gastronomy, our second restaurant, where I was able to pair. That one was much more like a budget version of Moto in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So we had to throw in some cocktails. We threw in some beers, and then there was a couple of wines too. And it was all while you're flavor tripping on Miracleberry. So then I had to take that into account and find beers that worked with the Miracleberry and all that madness. So I've had beer and food together in my brain since day one, And of course, I lived with my best friend who, was a kind of culinary genius in his own right, had his own website called Garrett's Table. We worked at Moto together. So when we weren't talking about cooking, we were brewing beer, talking about beer. We had 5 or 6 beers in our garage at any point. We'd bring it in for the staff so they'd have something to drink at the end of the night. And that's really how the conversation started for opening up what would eventually become Old Irving Brewing. So that conversation started a long time ago for us. And then I feel like there's extremes, though. We have kind of the brew pubs that kind of phone it in and maybe don't know as much about food.
That's what I want. Yeah.
And then we've got people who are getting Michelin stars for their food. You think about Band of Bohemia,
sure,
Moody Tongue, places like that who take it to a whole new level.
Yeah, but those are the only two that I think that we can.
Sure.
Yeah.
But then if you go into Chicago though, and you hang out at some of these breweries, man, I mean, you've got a lot of different cats who are making their own breads.
Sure.
And they're making pizzas and they're doing all this really cool stuff. So
if you're just doing it by designation of Michelin, I meant.
Oh,
but
sure, yeah. By designation of Michelin.
Yeah, there's not a ton that are out there.
I just feel like there's a big gap.
There's not even a full hand versus them that are out there these days. But the ones who are sort of phoning it in, right? And I try to reconcile this quite a bit. Having written about beer and food for the better part of the last decade and a half, there are some places that have chefs in the kitchen that are fully immersed, and they're like, okay, I'm tasting everything, and I want you to drink this beer while you have this bite, and it's going to hopefully do the way that you were talking about banana splits with with Creek, and then there's other places where it's our wings are really good, and they're and maybe they are, and maybe they're not, but there isn't a lot of full thought behind it. It's okay, we're a brew pub, so we have to have chicken fingers, we have to have burgers, we have to have pizzas, kind of thing. And I living in the in New Jersey, I find it an affront for anybody else to make pizzas, including New York City. But
That's awesome.
It's going to get me canceled.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's finally going to get
From
me
Chicago, I'm
thrown
not
off
going to
the
comment at all. I'm not going to get into that fight.
Chicago pizza is its own thing. Detroit pizza is its own thing. Like
Sure.
there are regional pizzas that
Sure.
exist out there, kind of
Yeah.
thing. But like there are other places where it's like New York style pizza, and it's unless you're getting the water, and unless you're getting like you're just not going to, or manipulating the water, like you're not going to
Sure.
get what we have. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's so much talk about beer and the perfect pint and the perfect representation of when you open up a can or a bottle or a pour off of a draft. Should there be as much of a focus for places that serve food to deliver a menu with that in mind that matches the beer? Like,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to go back, I mean, I think we kind of, when we first opened OIB, we definitely started off with a chef that was a little bit higher caliber, and I think we were shooting a little bit high in terms of a dining experience and what people were willing to pay for a dining experience in a brewery. We had a lot of things like prawns and, like whole prawns with like beautiful sauce, and they're done on a wood fire grill. And I mean, we really went all out when we first started. I mean,
The aesthetic, though, from when I
marrow.
visited, like, didn't match what you just said.
Exactly. So the menu changed because the people said no. They were basically like, we don't want that experience with you. And it was kind of, it was one of those things where it took a lot of conversation. We had to be like, all right, well, if we're going to do wings and we're going to do burgers and we're going to do sandwiches, it's got to be great. It can't just be, we're not just going to buy some frozen freaking patties, reheat them and just, make passable food to sell some beer. That's not what we're doing. So each thing had to be meticulously made to be delicious and made by the right hands. And then it had to go through my face and my business partner's face. And when Matthias Mergis was with us from Folkart, it had to go through his face before it would ever go into the hands of a guest. So while we do make all those things, our chef once in a while, he uses beer in a lot of the things that he creates, but he is always trying to just make really great food. I'm always just trying to make really great beer, and we find ways for those two things to pair, but I don't want anyone up their own ass about it.
I get it.
I don't want that experience for my guests when they come in. I want them to be relaxed. I want them to chill. If they want pairing recommendations, my staff can do it. I've got all the training there for them. I've got a document that's called a menu matrix that goes through every single ingredient in our beer, in our food, in our cocktails, suggested pairings, everything. But when you sit down, I don't want that highfalutins. I think it's almost looked down upon a lot. And when people come into breweries, they don't want that. If they want that, there's places in Chicago to get that.
How much does the aesthetics of the place work into it, though? Because I think about when I was there, and I have, I'm fuzzy at best most days.
Yeah.
But like, I'm sitting at long picnic tables at your place. I can see stainless through a garage door-ish kind of window thing over on this side. So prawns or you serving me something, it's going to be like, I would enjoy the hell out of it. But there are certain aesthetic cues where it's like, okay, I'm going to sit up a little bit more straight kind of thing. Where I sat when I had your food did not make me sit up a little bit more straight, even though I enjoyed the fuck out of it.
Right.
How much does the atmosphere also play into beer and or food?
I mean, everything, right? I mean, I think when we first started doing that food, it obviously didn't play with kind of the way the place looked and the vibe that was kind of going on in general, which is why we changed it, right? And it was getting to a point where our food cost was high, and it was just like, this doesn't make sense on a lot of levels. And people in that area, they were just looking for good food. There wasn't a ton of good food readily available in that neighborhood. We got the wood fire grill. We could do great burgers off of that. We were making our own buns. We work with a local baker now because we've gotten too busy to keep up with our own buns. And
that's nice.
Yeah, and
it's a good problem to have.
It's a good problem to have. Every time everyone says it to me, I go, yeah, it's still a fucking problem. But we just kind of figured it out, and I think people have come to know And I like the vibe now. I like my team now. I like the way the brewery feels. I want to hang out there. It's so cool to go to work and like want to be there. Even when I've worked in like really nice restaurants, I don't want to be there after I was done with my day. But I want to stay and I want to chat and I talk to the regulars and they're enjoying the burger of the week or the wing of the week or whatever the hell we're doing. But we still have touches on there to let you know we're having some old culinary fun. Octopus. Braised octopus that's kissed on the wood fire grill, served with the the poached, smashed, and fried potatoes, things like that, where we get to show up a little bit, be like, all right, this is what we can do,
See, I'm the type of adventurous, I hope, eater and drinker where if I showed up at your brewery today and like I saw poached octopus, I'd be like, all right. Like if you guys are going to put it on there, like I hope it's not coming off of a Cisco truck.
No.
And like I'm going to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
Was there a time where you weren't enthused about showing up at work?
Yeah, dude. For sure. The pandemic definitely was not a time that was fun to show up at OIB. That was a hard time. I think that was a hard time for everyone. It was a hard time for my team. It was a hard time for me. It was that time where whatever choice you made, it was never a good choice.
Yeah.
You either had to make a bad choice or a less bad choice. And it really sucked. And I felt like I went from kind of being on top of the world to thinking I might lose my business. So that was scary. My wife was pregnant at the time. And I was worried about getting sick and bringing it home to her. And lo and behold, I did get sick. And I did bring it home to a pregnant wife who did not ever get it because I had both windows open in the middle of April and did all the right things to make sure she didn't get sick. But like, it was not a very cool time to be at OIB. However, I will say that the addition of a bar during a pandemic is really nice thing to have when you have a bunch of full tanks of beer and a few people to talk to and, a bunch of bottles getting dusty on the back bar. It makes it a little bit more manageable. But, that was a time when I really didn't want to. And I would say in fine dining a lot. I mean, fine dining was a tough gig as well.
We're sitting right now in the lobby of a Best Western.
It's the best.
It's this is a new experience for me. We're here a stone's throw from the Manchester, New Hampshire airport. And in the morning, as you mentioned, you're going to give us a talk and focusing on mental health.
Yeah.
You're a Chicago brewer, an Illinois brewer. You're here in New Hampshire talking about mental health. This is obviously something that you've given enough thought behind and talked about enough that you got on 2 planes to come here to share with other folks in the industry. When I hear you talk about COVID, when I hear you talk about, the worry of running a brewery and a restaurant and everything else like that, we haven't shied away from talking about this on the show, but there's a lot of worry out there, and there are a lot of things that people are maybe aware of but aren't paying full attention to or not willing to pay full attention to. Why are you here?
Well, the biggest reason I'm here is because I wanted to make sure that anytime I get the chance to destigmatize a conversation around mental health, especially in our beloved industry, that I take it. It's been near and dear to my heart. The same gent I worked for at Moto, Mr. Hamaro Cantu, opened Moto Ing, eventually barista with him, and eventually what was supposed to be Old Irving Brewing died by suicide. And that was a big hit to our community, a big hit to me personally. He was a really dear friend and also mentor, and we can go through the whole list. Personally, I've struggled with mental health issues my whole life. I've been in and out of mental hospitals in my youth and my teens. I've been suicidal. That's the reason I was in these the mental hospitals when I was younger, and they put me on all kinds of medication, and people didn't know what the hell they were doing back then. Everyone was just kind of. I felt like I was being poked and prodded by interested parties as a very young man. And then coming to Chicago, I found a perfect group of people who were just like me, island of misfit toys in this restaurant industry. And that was Moto for me, and that was the beer industry for me. It was a lot of people who were very creative, very friendly, very dedicated, but also maybe had been struggling at some point in their lives, maybe more than most, with their mental health. And so after Omar died, I kind of, the work is never really done for me, and kind of paying him back for really opening this door. Right now I'm married. I got an awesome kid. I have this awesome business partner. None of these things would exist without that man who's no longer here. So a big part of what I do is always with him in mind, and making sure that if I can say one thing or just destigmatize a conversation or give one person a resource and it saves one life, or it makes someone in a room where they've maybe never been seen before feel seen and feel heard, then I will do that until I die. And so that's why I'm here, and that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, is the conversation around how do we talk about our mental health and make it as common as talking about our physical health.
Do breweries do this enough?
I think it's getting better every day, and I think breweries are the perfect area or the perfect business to be able to do that. However, I will say that breweries are also a perfect breeding ground for flight. When I say flight, I mean drinking too much. We have every chemical available to us any day of the week. We're, not many breweries are drug testing or anything like that. So you want to get high, show up for work. You want to trip on mushrooms and stay up all night and do cocaine, we're not testing you the next day, as long as you can show up for work. You can do all those things, but how do you maintain your balance and longevity in this industry and be able to perform? And when does your fun night out become your fortnight out, or your month out, or your year out? And how do we find that balance in an industry that's surrounded by it and just absolutely engulfed in it? It almost seems like an impossible task a lot of times. And so tomorrow we're going to be talking a lot about resources, kind of putting into context visually how we use our valves in a healthy way, when we know it's time to seek help, how to seek that help, where to seek help, who to talk to. From an owner's perspective, how do you have those conversations? How do you actively listen?
Yeah.
How do you listen without drumming up your own stigmas, cutting them off, making it about you? How do you make people in your sphere feel heard, but also take care of yourself? And that's a big part of it, because if you can't take care of yourself, taking care of your employees, taking care of your staff, taking care of your friends, that's going to be pretty much impossible.
How do you address that at OIB?
At OIB, it's one of those things too, where it's not an all or nothing thing all the time. But I will say that one, we've had the Hope for the Day trainings. Yeah. So I've done the trainings multiple times. So
can you talk about Hope for the Day for folks who don't know?
Yeah, so Hope for the Day is a 501c3 non-for-profit organization out of Chicago. Their saying is, it's okay not to be okay. Yeah. It's a big piece of it. They do everything from collaborations, coffees. There was talk about they were going to put messages like on papers, like literally rolling papers, so you could call. So you could literally call a helpline. If you're sitting there getting high, you could look at the paper and have a helpline number right on it. So that way, when you run away from your problems, it's right there. Yeah. I made the first beer that had all of the Hope for Day resources on the can itself. So they're really trying to kind of go into that gray area where you're not supposed to talk about mental health. No, you can talk about mental health whenever.
Absolutely should.
You can talk about it over a beer, while smoking a joint. You can talk about it while you're exercising. You can talk about it at the bar. You can talk about it at home. There's no bad place to talk about this stuff. And Hope for the Day was really great at making sure that it actually felt kind of like cool to talk about your mental health, because you see these guys, it's all black shirts, hope for the day in white. They're all a bunch of people who have like worked for bands, or the band managers, or they actually play in a band, or they're comic book nerds. They're just like us, you know?
All right, so there's a lot of musicians.
A lot of musicians, a lot of people from the industries that I think I personally connect to.
Yeah.
And so then I became an educator with them, and I would go around the city to different breweries, setting up collaborations with them, setting up
were those
festivals.
Were those hard to do? Setting up the collaborations, were those hard conversations to have with outside people?
You know what's really funny is, with outside people, with brewers, it was not even hard. It wasn't even a question. It was yes, when.
That's great.
Yes, when. And so, I mean, we did a Hope for the Day, Hope Fest at Old Irving Brewing, and literally I had to tell some brewers no because I didn't have enough space. So we just didn't have enough space to host all these freaking brewers that wanted to be a part of it. They wanted to be a part of the conversation. And now it's pretty cool. Like, we've kind of set that base, I think, over the last 6 years with a lot of the work that myself and my fellow brewers have done, where we do talk openly about it. I share my resources all the time. Yeah. I think my therapist loves me because I think I've referred so many people to him. So when I miss a session, bless him, he doesn't charge me the big amount of money when I miss, because I've referred a bunch of people to him. So being able to have those conversations is huge for Hope for the Day. I worked with them, and then I independently, within my business, within my sphere, make sure that people know that it's not just like, hey, it's an open door. Like, no, that I'm an owner that's going to actively listen to you. I'm an owner that does hear you, does see you, maybe doesn't understand all the time, but I will listen, and then I will try to find the resources for you and put you down a path. And then I'm going to check in and make sure you're on some kind of path.
I want to ask you two questions. Related to that. So if there is a brewery owner or a brewery decision maker listening to this show right now, what is the first thing that they can do to get on a meaningful path for the people that show up at their building every day?
Making sure that, first of all, that message is known, that this is a safe space. We can talk. Second would be the understanding that you're hiring a person, and they have thoughts, they have feelings, they have emotions. There is no leave your emotions at the door. That's not realistic. That's not how our brains work. I know I'm an elder millennial, an elder woke, if you will.
Okay.
And so,
what year were you born?
1984.
Oh, okay.
So I'm like just barely a millennial. Yeah. And where I come from, where I come from, and the way I worked, that's what every chef has always told me. Leave it at the door, and whatever happens to you in here, leave it in here. And I'm just like, that what?
You can't
compartmentalize. You can't do that. So it was just
drinking route beer.
Unrealistic expectation of mental health in a way, and from people who just know fuck all about it. So understanding that they don't know anything about it first, understanding that we are hiring individuals, and that if you have a great employee that has been there since day one, and then all of a sudden you're starting to see these signs, don't reach for the reprimand button right away. It's not necessary. It's going to make whatever's happening worse. But instead, you come to them with concern and care. You know how much of a difference it makes when I have a guy who's been showing up every single day on time, always kills it. All of a sudden, they're showing up late. Bags under their eyes. They've been drinking too much. They've been, there's all these signs. They're just kind of dragging. They're not as focused. You can go, wow, this guy's fucking up, and then all of a sudden the rumor mill starts between all the employees. Oh, this guy's fucking up. No, that person is struggling. Yeah. That person is clearly struggling. How do we, and then start that conversation? So making sure, one, for that owner, that you let it be known that this is a place where we take mental health seriously, and we are going to take you at your word. We're going to give you X amount of sick days, and there's going to be an X amount of mental health days.
Yeah.
And when something goes wrong, being able to have the flexibility to be able to manage that. I have a lot of different people. You're not managing everyone with one big blanket.
Right.
You can't. Everyone's different. I don't manage my 53-year-old brewer the same that I do my 33-year-old cellar person. They're two different people, and they trust me. I have to talk to them differently.
Sure.
And it's a very different situation. You manage individuals, and you have to have good management.
The second part of that, though, is asking you about, and by all means, if that moves you, but yeah. The second part of that is I asked you about an ownership to begin with, and how as an owner you do this. There are a lot of people who are in the brewing industry who listen to this podcast who don't have ownership. There's a lot of people who are outside of the brewing industry who don't have ownership in what they do.
Sure.
What's the question? How do you?
Yeah.
I feel like people know on a certain level.
Sure.
You were pretty open about where you were in your life at certain points.
Yeah.
What's the first question or the first action that you would encourage people to undertake if they're feeling a certain way right now?
The first thing I would do if I were feeling a certain way right now is I would think about our baseline first. Where's our baseline? What is our baseline of some kind of joy, some kind of happiness? What was that point? So just understanding where that was and understanding where we're at right now. Once we can figure that out, because it happens so quickly, right? You're doing okay, life's fine, do. All of a sudden, like something happens and like you're up in your own head, and then you're not able to really focus, and then now you've been drinking for 5 days and you're in your underwear and you're sad, you can't get out of bed, you can't make it to work on time.
Yeah.
Something happened along that way. So, and if you're too far along, before, let's say, you get to like the critical stage, which is thoughts of suicide, thoughts of self-harm, things like that, but you're in this phase where you really want and need help, ask for help. HFTD.org has a navigation bar. I'm going to go through how we use that tomorrow. You literally just put in a zip code. You go to hftd.org, you press find help, a little bar comes up, you put in your zip code, and it shows you all of the local resources that are available to you. You can use this whether you're going through something or one of your friends is going through something. Then you can actually take it from there and you can go, I need free because maybe I don't have health insurance because I'm part of a small brewery. I need...
Or just anybody.
Anybody, yeah. Or, it goes from everything from substance abuse to therapists, group therapists. Victims of domestic abuse, anything like that, and you can go through that and go through it. For anybody who's feeling like they're teetering or like you're starting to have those thoughts, feelings, and emotions, what are we doing? And do you feel like you can do something about it? Like if you can do something about it right now, awesome. And it sounds so obvious, but it's like small things. For me, it's the old military thing. When I make my bed in the morning, it's one small thing that if I can make that bed, I can get up early enough and I can make that bed. It sets the day right. I know the bed's made. I got that done. At least I got that.
Right.
And then from there, it's like simple things like washing your ass, making sure you're clean. Like I have to go to basics like that sometimes when I get too far down the rabbit hole, making sure even if like I really don't want to do it, trimming my beard, shaving my head, those kinds of things, going for a quick walk. But sometimes it can be as simple as just taking a breath, walking away, remembering what you used to love to do. We always think there's not enough time. Take the time, go do it. What do you like? For me, it's like I love to go see movies. I'll go see a movie by myself. That's a huge one. I'll come out feeling so much better. But when you get to that critical phase where you feel like the stigma around what we're allowed to talk about and not talk about is gagging you, and you've got the tape over your mouth, that's when it's time to ask for help.
Yeah.
And you got to know who to ask for help. And some people don't have anybody, and that's scary as shit. So obviously,
and that's where the website comes in.
That's where the website comes in, the National Suicide Hotline, things like that, where you can reach out to them or just tell one of your friends.
There's always going to be somebody available.
Always. And as a someone from the community to support these people, how best do we support when someone does come forward? Even now, I get flustered when someone reaches out because I get reached out to pretty often, obviously.
And you're putting yourself out there these days.
Exactly, and they know they can reach out to me. And people have reached out to me with heavy stuff.
It's great.
But the first thing that we always do is we always want to make sure, one, that their body is safe. Are they threatening self-harm? Are they saying they're going to hurt themselves?
Yeah.
And if they repeat it back to me, then it's time to make sure their body is safe, make sure they are safe. So I find out where they are. If I'm not there, I keep them on the phone, make sure I'm talking to them. Meanwhile, I'll put them on speaker. I'll be calling someone else to make sure that we're doing a wellness check. 911 can be scary, especially when you talk about people like minorities, black people. Call police? No, thank you.
Yeah.
So there's certain ways you can say things, with these emergency services to say, hey, I need a wellness check at this person. This person is having a mental health crisis. We don't. There's no crime being committed, but this person is sad, and I think they're thinking about hurting themselves. And doing a wellness checkup. So making sure that information is getting portrayed well enough to the dispatchers to get them safe. And a lot of people go, well, what if they're not? What if there's just a cry for help? And I'm like, then answer the call.
Yeah.
Answer the cry. Yeah. Then take care of them.
Who the fuck cares?
Right. Yeah. Because the worst that's going to happen, and trust me, I've had people that were pissed off at me about it now who came and thanked me later, And so, it's a sticky situation. It's not comfortable. It's really, really hard. You're fighting against a lot of stigma to be able to make those calls, but you have to. And then follow up with your friend, man. Follow up with your friend. Take care of them. Ask them how things are going. What are they doing to take care of themselves today?
The follow-ups are so important.
That's the biggest one for me, man. Is coming back, and I ask my team. Someone will tell me they're tired. And what do we do in the brewing industry with a bunch of hard workers? Oh, you're tired.
Yeah.
Just instantly gaslight. Oh, well, let me tell you about what I did.
Right.
It feels so shitty. When people tell me they're tired, I'm like, well, what are you doing to take care of yourself to make sure that you're not tired? That's my next question. Are you getting enough sleep?
Yeah.
Drinking enough water? When's your next day off? What are you doing this weekend, dude? Like what? And I ask my team that all the time. Man, I'm tuckered. I'm like, well, I know their drinking habits because they don't go anywhere else to drink because they drink free at the pub. So I know they were there till late night. Then hey man, maybe it's time to take a night off, dude.
Yeah.
Take a night off. Go home. Get some well needed rest. Get that powerful post hangover rest, and make sure you rest your body and your mind and come back. I mean, I've had guys who are breaking down in the front of my brewery. I mean, during the pandemic specifically, who just were toast. And I was just like, fuck, something's got to change. So those guys went on 4 on 3 off, 10-hour days, 40 hours a week. And that was it. I'm like, you guys get 3 days off in a row every week, come hell or high water. And I do not bug them. I try. If I need to, it's an emergency. They don't hear a peep from me on those days off,
which is great. Yeah. And that's
So
I'm glad you're doing these conversations. I'm glad you're here in New Hampshire. I'm glad you're talking about this. These are necessary conversations that need to happen, and they are wildly uncomfortable conversations to have.
Always.
But I don't want to shy away from them because we need them.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I hope that we get to a point where it's not uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not uncomfortable.
You know
for
what
me.
I mean? I'm not trying to be like, I don't want to talk about this.
No, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's stigma, right? And so the problem is that, all right, let's say, you'll hear me say this again tomorrow, so sorry if I'm spoiling anything. But if you come in through that door and you're limping.
I love that you think that I'm not going to sweep in tomorrow. This is pretty good. This is why we're doing this now, so that I can sweep.
So if you walked in tonight and I saw you limping through that front door, you're messed up. But you just slipped outside because there was a snowstorm or something. What's the first thing I'm going to do? Right? I'm gonna try and figure out how to help you. Man, maybe we're gonna elevate your leg. We're gonna put some ice on it. Hey man, can I help you out? Maybe you can even throw your arm over me, right?
Yeah.
And we'll kind of hobble around and we'll get you somewhere. Or if you have a cold, I have a ton of remedies. Or if you have a hangover,
sure.
Everyone's got a remedy. When we talk about it easily, it doesn't even matter. But if I'm messed up, and I'm struggling inside, and the injuries aren't on the outside, but they're up here. That all of a sudden it becomes really hard to talk about, and that's stigma, and it's been passed down to us generation to generation from our dads and from people who didn't like to talk about their problems, and from grandpas who don't talk about wars and all that other stuff. We're not supposed to, especially men. We're not supposed to talk about our feelings.
And in a male-dominated industry that beer is, I think that there is a lot of that exists as well.
Suck it up, Buttercup.
Yeah.
Come on, man. You got to get the shit done.
Yeah.
It's always like that. And it's just like, that's not sustainable. And if you want to keep employees for a long time, you want people who are going to work hard for you and for a long time. You don't want to retrain employees and take on all of all of that amount of money that it takes to retrain everything, there is a monetary value to being a good person. And I'm telling you right now, we do not struggle with people.
Yeah.
A lot of people do. And that's in the front of the house. That's in our kitchen. We do a few things, man. We pay them.
It's important.
Yeah, it's a big one. We make sure we create an environment where they're busy, so they're making tips.
Sure.
Things like that. And then we make sure to hear them, see them, and make sure that we're fair. And it's amazing that a lot of people have a really hard time with that because they didn't come from that.
No.
They didn't come from that world. They don't understand how it works. So hopefully tomorrow during my presentation, I can shine a little light on that. I am going to talk specifically about seeing the owners too, because this shit's hard if you don't know about it.
Right.
You just wanted to make some good beer and have people
Now
belly
all
up
of a
to your
sudden,
bar, and now
yeah.
all of a sudden, when you're an owner, you got to play therapist too. Sometimes you have to take care of your people. You can't sit there and say, "Oh, you're my family," and then not treat them like that.
I want to follow up with you after you give this talk,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope you're able to give this talk in other places. It feels a little bit weird, but I'm curious about your answer. On the show, I've been asking folks the green door question, which is, I don't know if you know the show The Good Place. But in the final season of The Good Place, they introduce a concept of a green door, where you can walk through a green door, be any place, anytime, doing whatever you want kind of thing. So if such a door existed on our plane of existence, and you could finish this conversation and walk down the hallway here at the Best Western Manchester Airport, and walk through a green door and be at any pub or any brewery, anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like in your glass?
Wow, that's a big one. I know you ask this to other folks on your shows all the time, and I don't think I've put enough thought behind it.
Fine.
My mind's racing. I definitely, it wouldn't. I don't know if it'd be beer. If I'm walking through that green door and I could be anywhere I wanted to be.
Yeah.
I had this really lovely trip to San Sebastian in Spain with Chef Amaro Cantu back in the day, and with my lovely friend Derek Hall, who runs the Trotter Project out there, and all these awesome culinarians. If I could be there in San Sebastian, where you want to talk about people who care about food and about beverage, there's not a lot of great beer, I'll be honest with you, but there's a lot of great wine, a lot of great cider, a lot of great everything else. The culture breathes and lives cuisine. It's amazing. It's one of the most beautiful places I've been to for so many reasons. I would be there. I would be there with I'd be there with my wife, with my kiddo, with a handful of my favorite humans in my life. And we'd probably be drinking some kind of really funky, fun, wildly fermented cider. And then eventually getting into some maybe Rioja and eating pulpo, some octopus, some seafood, things like that. That'd be my happiest place.
That's awesome.
And if some good beer was around, that'd be dope. That'd be just fine.
That's just a little bit of powdered sugar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That'd be really lovely. But that's where I'd want to be, and those are the people I'd want to be with. I think the beverage would come secondary, but yeah, that's where I'd want to be.
I love it. Yeah. Thanks for sitting down for the podcast. Thanks for doing
of course,
this.
man. My pleasure.
Again, if you're having thoughts of self-harm or suicide, text or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988 from your phone. There are also resources available at speakingofsuicide.com, and there you can access important resources. A quick reminder to go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, and read great new content, as well as the archives going back to 1979. Do you have questions, comments, concerns, guest suggestions? Let me know. You can email me. It's John Hall, JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com, or tell me on Twitter at John_Hall. Follow All About Beer on social media at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, you can email us at info@allaboutbeer.com, where we can share our advertising information, or simply go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Don't forget, All About Beer has a podcast channel now. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday. The BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.